So Annie's passion is to work with leaders who want to build healthy teams aligned with their active, dynamic faith. So Annie has worked in ministry and nonprofit organizations through seasons of growth and downsizing, interesting, transition and reconstructing, chaos and hope. Perfect. I'm so glad you're here, Annie. She has experienced all kinds of people challenges and still firmly believes that we work better when we work together. Annie has been honored to work with some incredibly talented leaders that commit their time and energy to making the world a better place, which describes every one of you in the Well Intensive. So Annie has worked with leaders. She has access and experience from over 16 years in nonprofit management and pastoral ministry, 8 years as a leadership trainer and a consultant. She has a master's of arts in human resource and change leadership from the University of St. Thomas, and her coaching certificate from the Center of Coaching Excellence and certification as an MBTI practitioner. She uses all a variety of assessments in her work, but the best assessment of what she believes your organization needs is you, each one of you. Her goal is to work with you, work with us today to complement the brilliance in your leadership, teams, and organizations. So I have known Annie now personally for several years, and she's one of those people where every time you have a conversation with her or hear her speak, she drops nuggets and explains things that really propel you forward. And every time I interact with her, I leave changed. And my paradigm is sharpened so I can continue to overcome those roadblocks that come up and do exactly what she's saying. I'm just leveraging how I was uniquely designed in everything that I do. So I'm so thrilled that she's here today. And with that, Annie, you can take it away.
Take it away. Awesome. I am super excited to be here. And just to let you guys know a little bit about me, I live in Arden Hills, actually nestled right in between Northwestern College and Bethel College. So if you know where those at, I'm kind of in between the two. I can walk to both if I want to. I have been married 15 years to Bernard, and we have a daughter together, and she's 8 and in 2nd grade. So I have recently become a homeschool mom, which is a very odd role for me because that's not my background and my experience, and I would not say that it's a strength for me. But I'm learning like all of us are learning how to do things a little bit differently. I also was married before and was a widow at age 32. So my kids from my first marriage with Kevin are 30 and 23. And my 30-year-old Kaylin has 3 kids. So a 5 and a 3-year-old girls, and then a little 1-month-old baby boy. So we have our first boy, which is fun. So my 23-year-old lives at home and is still going to college. So that's kind of my story. And so it's fun. My husband and I are totally opposites. So I'm like a total extrovert people person kind of a gal. My husband is a inventor, scientist. Let me be in the lab behind a computer and machines because people don't make sense to me. So we really complement each other well. So I will talk about him a little bit in terms of complement in some of the examples that we'll talk about today, but also a lot in the workplace because I've worked in a variety of different settings with nonprofit, and I've also used Myers-Briggs with couples. And so I've been certified in Myers-Briggs for almost 20 years. And so I feel like I've used it to help people with their career. I've used it to help teams get along and figure out how to get along. And one of the things that I like the most about Myers-Briggs is when we can take it, parse it apart, and apply it into our lives. So I'm less interested in having you guys get really honed in on memorizing what your 4 letters are and knowing what your 4 letters are. And I'm more interested in giving you language that can describe what you prefer so that you can ask for what you need in relationships, and that you can adapt maybe what your strengths are in knowing that other people are going to be different than you, and what are some of the techniques that I can use to connect to people who might not share the same preferences as me. So that's really what our focus is today. So I'm gonna put a PowerPoint slide on the screen. I'm gonna share my screen and do some stuff with PowerPoint slide. I'm gonna have you do some of the activities in the chat box. So you'll wanna be able to have that handy in case you wanna, it won't be long. I'm not gonna make you do a paragraph. It'll just be a 1-word kind of answer thing. However, you are welcome to put questions in the chat box at any time. I am going to give us time for questions at the end, and then we're going to be coming back to this setup here where we chat on screen away from the PowerPoint for some of our activities, and you're welcome to jump in with questions that you have at any time. Sometimes in this like video format though, it's like it moves on too fast and you're like, I didn't get to ask that question. So jot that down on your handouts, because I will like open it up at the end for an official Q&A time. So I just want to make sure if you have questions, they don't get missed. So jot it down on your handout. Some of the activities I'm going to have you do are going to require you to have a paper and a pen or pencil. So if you have your handouts in front of you, you can jot on that, but it won't be, again, it won't be long. So just even one piece of scratch paper is probably enough for you to do the activities that we have planned. I love this workshop because I like it really highly interactive, is kind of like always my goal, because I feel like we learn best when we do something with what it is that we're trying to learn. So this has been a new format for me to do it in a video format because the interaction is totally different. But again, we're going to be moving from activity to activity. You're not going to hear me talking for 2 hours, and there's going to be a lot of interchange and interaction between us. So I hope that as much interaction as we can create in an online virtual environment, that we'll get to do that. So I want to get us started though by first hour we're going to talk about Myers-Briggs itself. I know you guys have done some of the pre-work, you've taken the assessment, some of you have done a lot of work around this. So I want to just briefly go through the Myers-Briggs and the 4 pairs of the Myers-Briggs in this first hour, so that we can get really clear on what our preferences are and how they apply to our life, specifically as it relates to communication. So I am going to be talking a lot about communication, because I think communication is the foundation for all the things that you guys are talking about. It's how do we work together better with others? It's how do we relate to people who are different than we are? How is it that we can know what our strengths what our strengths are, and then also recognize that other people might have different strengths. And so communication is kind of at the core of that. So we're going to circle around that a lot. And then in the second half, we're going to dive deep into that. We're going to talk about 4 communication styles that really merge out of the Myers-Briggs, and then we're going to apply them to some real life stories and give you guys a chance actually to apply them in your own life. So we'll dive into all of that and kind of go with the flow as it goes. So if you guys have questions, feel free. I like to kind of follow where you guys want to go as well. So the first thing I'm going to do though is I'm going to share my screen, because I want you guys to start right away with an activity. All right, can you guys all see my screen? All right, I see some head nodding, so I'm going to go for it. All right. So the first thing I want you to do is grab a pen, piece of paper, anywhere that you have it, and sign your name, just like you're signing a check. All right, now switch your pen or your pencil to your other hand and sign your name again. All right, now what I want you guys to do is type in the chat box the first time that you were signing your name. How did it feel? Give me some adjectives. What did it feel like when you're signing your name with your preferred hand? Effortless, easy, normal, typical. When we're operating in our preferences, that's exactly what it's like. It's effortless, it's easy, it's typical, it's normal, it's what we expect comes easy to everyone. It flows smoothly. All of those adjectives are what describes when we're working with our preferences. So what Myers-Briggs is measuring when you're taking that assessment is, what do you prefer? It's not necessarily measuring what you're good at or what your performance is, but it's measuring what it is that you prefer. It's like your preferred hand. So when you were signing your name the second time, give me some adjectives. What was it like? Backwards. Clunky, awkward, hard, exactly. So when you're doing something that's outside of your preferences, those are the same adjectives you're going to use. It's going to feel clunky, it's going to feel hard, it's going to feel awkward, and it's not going to come as easy, and it's going to take you a longer time to do it, because it probably took you longer to sign your name the second time than it did the first time. And so when we're talking about preferences, we have to recognize that those are the things, preferences are those things that come easy. It's the things that you're thinking of, like, doesn't everybody do it this way? That's what you prefer. And so when you are operating outside of your preferences, it's going to be harder. It's going to take more energy. It's going to take more effort. And that is what it is to be like in non-preferences. But that doesn't mean you can't sign your name with your opposite hand, right? Because all of you can do it. So performance, for personality and preferences is never an excuse for bad behavior. We can do things that are outside of our preference. So just because we don't prefer it, just because it doesn't come easy, doesn't mean that personality is an excuse for not doing something that is necessary or a part of what needs to be done in a situation. But it's important to recognize that whenever we're operating outside of our preferences, it's going to take more energy. It might take us a longer amount of time. So being aware of the in preference and out of preference zones in our life is what we're trying to get at here in this first hour. What's our in preference zones and what are out of preference zones? So let's go ahead and talk about the Myers-Briggs pairs. You guys should have seen something that looks like this that's on our screen right now in your pre-work. It was 4 quadrants, and in each quadrant was these pairs. And I wanted you to pick one on one side of the pair and one on the other. So this is just an example here on my screen of extrovert and introversion. And you pick one or the other, and then at the end of it, you total up your check marks in one column, and you put it in the first column. You total up the check marks in the other column, put it in the second column. I'd like you guys to have this close by, because I'm going to use it as a measure against some of the self-sort activities that we're going to be doing as we go through this. So have this on hand. If you haven't completed it as we're talking and walking through this, go ahead and complete it. But just have this on hand and nearby as we're going through this, because this is your first self-sort exercise. So when you take the assessment, those 2 links that I sent you, and even if you take the official Myers-Briggs assessment, you have to remember that those things are simply validated, reliable, studied self-sort activities. You are still the one that's answering the question. So you are the one that's deciding in that moment, based on that question, what is it that you prefer? And sometimes we have to do that in multiple different ways to really get at and uncover the core of what our preferences are. So I like to layer things on for you. So you've got the assessment, you've got this self-sort exercise that we're talking about here, and now we're going to do some actual practical activities where I'm going to take you into a context on the basis of each one of these preference pairs and give you a chance to just really interact with it in a specific context. So we're going to start with extroversion and introversion. Then we're going to move our way into sensing, intuition, and thinking and feeling. And the reason that these 2 in the middle are in pink is because they're the core of our personality. So when we're talking Myers-Briggs, extroversion and introversion and judging and perceiving are kind of like the spice. They add flavor to our personality and nuances to our personality, but the core is these mental processes right here in the middle. And sensing and intuition is how we take in information. This is what information gets our attention. What is the way that we pay attention to information? And once we've got that information in there, the question is, how do we make decisions with it? And that's the decision-making style, thinking and feeling. And so these are the core of our personality. They're also the most influential in the way that we communicate. So later on, when we break down the communication styles, we're going to dive deep into these 2 preferences just a little bit more. So let's start with extroversion and introversion. What it's not is I like to be with people or I don't like to be with people. And a lot of times, and I am seeing so many memes on Facebook right now in quarantine around extroversion, introversion. That definition of extroversion, introversion is not what we're talking about here. So with Myers-Briggs, what we're talking about here is not that you like to be away from people or you like to be with people, but it's really, where are you energized? So people with a preference for extroversion are energized when they have a breadth of relationships. So they tend to have a lot of different kinds of relationships. So they might have close friends, and then they have, family and friends. And then they have, their social friends or their large group friends. And then they have their acquaintances, and then they might have their networks, and then they have all the potential friends that might be out there. And so they have these concentric circles of friends. And that's how they think about relationship. Is that these breadth and diversity of relationships. And so people with a preference for introversion, they think about relationships differently because they're energized differently. People with a preference for introversion, they have their few close friends that energize them. They spend time with them, they pour into them, and they feel refreshed when those few close friends pour into them. And then there's everybody else. And it's not that they don't like everybody else, but it's just that they're not energized by everybody else. They're energized by their few close friends. And so it's where you get your energy. People with a preference for extroversion are energized by a lot of activity. So they need to keep active and they need to stay active. People with a preference for introversion are energized by the process of reflection. So reflecting on the things that have happened, reflecting on the events that have occurred or the activities that they've been a part of. So they can't jump from one activity to the next activity to the next activity, because they have to have that time in between those activities to simply reflect on them, because that's where they get their energy. So it's really about where you get your energy source. It does, the behavior you will see at times is that people with a preference for introversion will spend more time alone, and people with a preference for extroversion will spend more time with people because of that way that they're re-energized. But it doesn't mean that they don't like or don't work well with people. I work with people in ministry. So most of my clients are people doing people-oriented, service-oriented kinds of work. 2/3 of the clients that I work with have a preference for introversion, and they're in people-oriented professions. So we just got to be careful not to like put these into too much of a stereotypical role. I would say that's the biggest challenge with extroversion and introversion, is because it's common language that's out there. When it comes to Myers-Briggs, we're defining it just slightly differently. And people with a preference for introversion do like to be with people, but they're energized by a certain kind of interaction with people. And they have to create energy to do the other kinds of interactions. So going back to that right-handed, left-handed thing that we did earlier, there are certain parts of being with people that energize you. There's certain parts of being with people that don't. There's certain parts of being alone that energize you. There's certain parts of being alone that don't. And so really being aware of where you get your energy source is what we're talking about here. So I want to take you into a little bit of an exercise. So at the end of a very busy day, so this is not your worst day ever. It's not a horrible day, but you have just been busy doing what you do. What is it that you would like to do? Would you rather, on the blue side, get together with family or friends to unwind, or on the green side, have dinner at home alone or with one other person? Just keep track of this in your own mind. Would you rather tell someone all about your day, the good, the bad, and the ugly, the blue side, or would you rather spend time alone watching TV or reading to unwind? All right, I'm going to give you one more scenario before I have you pick what your most frequent type is, blue or green. Now you're working on a group with a project. In this group and in the interactions that you have as a group, how would you approach the task? The blue side is looking forward to working together as a group. That would be something that energizes you. On the green side is divide up your assignment so you can go away and do your part. That's the green side. The blue side is you would use these group sessions to socialize, as a chance to get to know each other and socialize. On the green side is you would keep the sessions as short as possible unless you're working with a close friend. On the blue side, you would share your ideas readily. And on the green side is you would share your ideas when asked. So when you think about just even in those contexts, when you would have the blue choice, that's more of a preference for extroversion. And the green side is a little bit more of a preference for introversion. So if you had more frequent green choices, that's a preference for introversion. If you had more frequent blue choices, that's a preference for extroversion. I want you now to go ahead and take a look at that pre-work that we did. And I want you guys to think about, what is it that you think your preference is? Do you think you prefer extroversion, introversion, or undecided? So put an E in the chat box if it's extroversion, an I in the chat box if it's introversion, and a U in the chat boxes if it's undecided. And as you guys are doing that, I'm going to answer Jacqueline's question, because she asks a really good question in the chat box. Her question is, does this change throughout the different seasons of life? And the theory around Myers-Briggs is that our personality is the same no matter where we're born with it, and we have that personality all of our life. But here's what happens is that there's different contexts that start influencing our personality. So here's some of the things that I've heard. Based on context, you may take on a preference for a different season of your life. is that when I hear this a lot from young moms who have had an a preference for extroversion, then they had kids. And all they want to do when they get away from their kids is be alone. They do not want to go out and hang out with a bunch of people. They are not energized by being around other people. They just want time alone. And it's because their energy source is so depleted by running after young kids that they actually are looking for an alternative way to energize themselves. And so I've seen that happen. And then when their kids get older and they go back to school, I see a lot of those women moving back into the place of having energy sources around their extroverted activities or extroverted relationships. I do find in communication styles, what you'll see is the trend will still stay the same maybe throughout life. People with a preference for extroversion, in communication, they need to talk it out oftentimes. So they'll get stuck in their head and thinking about things, and then until they can express it and talk it out, they can get stuck in communication. Whereas people with a preference for introversion, no matter what their season of life, they will oftentimes still need that time to think it through before they can actually speak it. Even if it's just a few minutes, they need that time to circle it around in their head before they can sort their thoughts and then be able to express it. So, but you'll see that throughout all of these seasons of life and the different contexts that you're in can influence what you prefer in that context. So what I really encourage people to do is pay attention to the context. I've heard a lot with extroversion and introversion that at work, I tend to prefer extroversion because it's required for me to be able to do my job well. But when I get home, then I have a preference for introversion. And so that's a context influence. And so it probably means that you may have a natural preference for introversion, but the context that you're in draws out that other preference. And so you've taken the time to really nuance that and develop the skill around that. So in our group, we've got extroversion, extroversion, introversion, introversion, extroversion, extroversion, introversion, extroversion, a nice little mix for everyone here within this group of the difference between extroversion and introversion. All right, we're gonna dive into sensing and intuition. So what I want you to do right now is grab paper and pen, and I'm gonna give you 90 seconds to write about a snowman. I know that's a really horrible thing to do to everybody that's in Minnesota in April, but I'm gonna make you do it anyway. Pen and paper, I'm gonna give you 90 seconds to write about a snowman. All right, and go. All right, and stop. All right, wherever you stopped is totally fine. What I want to do is I'm going to explain the difference between sensing and intuition, and then we're going to come back all on screen, and I'm going to ask a few volunteers that would be willing to share what they wrote. And then as a group, I want us to try and figure out whether we think it's a preference for sensing and intuition and why. But first, I want to explain sensing and intuition to you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the differences between the two. And on the first page of your handout is a little bit more details about this, so you can have that in front of you as you're listening to what people wrote to help you decide what you think their preference might be. Again, sensing and intuition is all about how you take in information. So what's the information that's getting your attention? People with a preference for sensing think five senses. It's what you can see, what you can hear, what you can taste, what you can touch. That is the sensing way of gathering information. They're looking for observable data. So it's what they observe, something tangible, something in the real world. Their orientation is also very much to the past or present. So when they're taking information, they're looking to the past and they're saying, oh, this is what worked before, therefore it's what will work now. Or they'll be very much in the present. This is practically what we need to do and how we need to address this in the here and now. So that's the kind of language you're going to start hearing them speak. They're going to be talking practical, day-to-day language, or they're going to be looking to the past. You're going to hear the five senses. You're going to hear factual, observable detail. People with a preference for intuition, on the other hand, while they might start with some of that observable detail, they're going to take that inside pretty quickly and make some other sort of meaning out of it. They're going to create a framework from what they're seeing. They want to sense the deeper meaning. They're wanting to read between the lines. They're wanting to ask new ways of looking at this information. They want to find ways to be able to take these intangible concepts and actually make them tangible and articulate or express them in novel ways, using metaphor, using patterns, using stories, more imaginative stories, made up stories. So you're going to see that kind of symbols or possibilities or disparate data connected in some sort of unusual way in the way that they communicate. They are outside of the box thinkers. Their orientation is to the future. So they often don't look to the past. They're the ones that are going to be coming to the table saying, let's look at this in a totally different way. That's intuition speaking when it does that. So you guys can have that handout in front of you on page 1, but let's do this. I'm going to take us off share screen here. All right. And you guys can unmute yourself. And what I'd love to do is have a volunteer that would be willing to share what they wrote.
I'll go.
All right.
All right. I first wrote snowman, then I wrote round, white, winter, pretty, happy, joy, unique, iconic, frozen, coal, sticks, carrots, childlike.
I love it. Okay, so you guys, what do you think? Sensing or intuition, and why?
Probably sensing, right? Because it's a lot of like using your senses. She sees that it's white and round and coal, and using the present of like, these are the things that make up a snowman.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Anybody else have any other thoughts that you would add? Even the word childlike, which isn't a tangible physical word, is still more of a sensing word because it represents a reflection on the past or the stories that are behind a snowman, or maybe Frosty the Snowman comes to mind, or playing with the snowman as a child, or observing children playing with the snowman. So even though childlike is a little bit less of a tangible quality, it still represents kind of a sensing approach. Anybody see any sort of intuition there? That was pretty sensing, I think. All right, somebody else. Give me an example.
I put, a snowman is made out of snow. On a warmer day, the snow is sticky, and when you roll a snowball around in the yard, it gets bigger. Then you stack 3 on top of each other, add eyes and nose and arms, and you have a friend to smile at and will wave at the cars as they pass by.
All right, what do you guys think? Sensing or intuition?
Intuition.
Say more. What makes it intuition?
I'm thinking kind of the big picture, and I'm looking at the sheet that we had. trust insights and future dreams, well, rather than experiences. So she's like playing out the experience that she's had on how to make it. So maybe not.
I think there might be a little bit of both there. For sure in the beginning, it seemed like she was kind of like describing more of the snowman itself, but toward the end there was like this, even though it stayed in the present, there was this like waving at people that they went by, and it just made me curious, going, where would she go next with that? You know what I mean? Where would the whole writing go next? And I only gave you 90 seconds. And oftentimes it is true that people with a preference for intuition will start their communication like sensing, because they'll start with those observable details. So they'll start with, here's what a snowman looks like. And then, but then you did take it a next step further. And it just would be curious to me to see if you would take it the next step further. So I saw also a hint of intuition in there as well, even though you started with sensing. Anybody else want to share their example?
Okay, I feel like mine is kind of embarrassing, but I'm not embarrassed, but a little bit, because I was kind of like, I don't think I should share this, but I honestly don't know what I am, because on the assessment, I was like, literally, I put all of them as an S, and then I was like, why did my mind do this? Okay, anyway, so I started with white, cold, frost, ice, snow, and then I was done and I couldn't really think of any more. So then I just was like, well, I'll just get creative, and I'm a mom, so I just like made us. Okay, I'll just read it. There once was a snowman named Frosty who lived in a house on a hill. He saw a bird and he felt really sure, yes, Frosty was a very happy snowman. That was my...
All right, so you guys, what do you think? Sensing or intuition? What about it is sensing? What about it is intuition?
I feel like it's probably more intuition, because like you listed what you saw your list of what you saw was very short, and then you're like, I got nothing else. Like, so you started like looking to the future and of what a snowman could be.
Yep. Anybody else that you would, what are you noticing? Oh, I think you're on mute, Jacqueline. I think you're trying to say something, but you might be muted. Oh, you're back on mute. It went right back on. There.
Okay.
Gotcha.
If it'll stay. Okay. Because she's using a past experience of, I'm assuming, Jenna, you've seen Frosty the Snowman, right? Or you know what it is.
Yes, my kids read the book.
And so she's using a past experience to describe the present and future. So how does that work? Because I could say both, right?
Yep. I think that's a really good observation, because both sensing and intuition tell stories. They just tend to tell stories in a little bit of a different way. And yours, Jenna, might be like right on the borderline. So you'll have to be the one to kind of decide whether you think it fits more towards a sensing story or whether you think more towards an intuition story. People with a preference for sensing, when they tell stories, will draw on either past experiences or present realities. So Frosty is a past experience or a present reality, in that you're reading that book to your kids right now. So it's front of mind. And so that could be playing it out, which actually also could be, you know, influencing your story, even if you have a preference for intuition, because it's so front of mind for you. But present realities and, you know, past experiences is going to be how they tell stories. People with a preference for intuition, when they tell stories, they add anthropomorphized characters to their snowman. And so the snowman will do things that snowmen don't normally do. The snowman might travel to Canada, or the snowman might, you know, become a mechanical engineer and invent something in order to be able to save his life so that he never melts. You know, so the people with intuition really kind of like take the story, and they tend to really, if given enough time, so we're only given 90 seconds here. So again, we're going to start with that sensing, is that they're going to add characters or qualities onto that snowman, or add characters to the story that never existed in the real story. So those are the kinds of qualities that you'll see when it moves into that intuition. And so I'd say, Jenna, yours is kind of like right on that borderline. Like it really could go either way. Given a little bit more time, would you have gone this way? And I'm going to just take a minute actually here just to speak to mid zones. Is that we do have some of our preferences land right in the mid zone. And so if you take the assessment and one time you take it, you end on sensing, and the next time you take it, you end on intuition. And then, you do a self-sort exercise and you're like, the first one is sensing, but then the second exercise you do, it's now intuition. It's probably indicating that you might be one of those folks that has a mid-zone preference. If you do any Google searching about it, it's like your 4 Myers-Briggs letters, you put an X over a letter and that means you're mid-zone. So like you could be an IXFJ, and that means you could go S or N, and it'll tell you a little bit more nuance about that personality if you want to Google search it that way. And it can sometimes help you sort out the differences when you see them all packaged together. So you could just put an X in there. But what I really want people to, where you feel like you might be on a mid-zone in a preference, I really encourage you just to pay attention. What is the context that you prefer one over the other? And that context is what matters then. So like if you're at work, and like my husband is a mechanical engineer and he works down at the University of Minnesota in a lab, and he's actually mid-zone on sensing and intuition. In his dream world and in his dream job, more than anything else in the world, he would love to invent things. So he would love to design instruments that save the world that nobody has ever designed before. That's intuition. However, because he's a mechanical engineer and he has to make machines work, he spends a lot of his time calibrating machines and experimenting with machines and measuring data to find out if they're effective or not effective, and then plotting that data on a graph. And that's sensing. He's done this for over 30 years. And so for him, he can actually do the sensing and the intuition. And for him, it's taken a while to extract that out and go, you know what I really love is being an inventor. But my job requires me to do this. And so I'm going to do a little bit of both. Jennifer, do you have a question?
I do, because I thought and think I'm an N.
Mm-hmm.
And you guys all identified I was an S. And so now I'm looking back at like past things and trying to figure out, like even in our little test that we did, only 2 of mine were in sensing and the rest were in intuition.
Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting to me.
Well, and yours was like a lot of different words that were disconnected. And so I think it's one of those situations where the 90 seconds wasn't enough time for you to internalize those and make meaning and turn them into something. Like, what if we'd have given you 180 seconds? Then you have all these different ideas out there that you're looking at, and you're kind of like throwing them out there, and you're like going, okay, now how would she have connected those if we had given, because they were disconnected. So that is the one thing about your list that I would say is probably not sensing, is you didn't put them in a step-by-step plan. People with a preference for sensing love step-by-step plans. People with a preference for intuition can leave all of those details out there and then start weaving them together once they're all out there. So we got you to the place where you got it out there, but we didn't give you enough time to go, I'm going to put this with that, and I'm going to put this with that, and now I'm going to make meaning out of it and present it to you.
Okay,
so
that totally feels right.
Okay, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. That's why I like to take people through a bunch of different self-sorting activities, because one of the things now that you can know about yourself is that, well, sometimes maybe I just got to get it all out there before I can start seeing how I want to put it all together. Because that's how you did that activity, is you just put it all out there first. Do you have a preference for extroversion as well? Introversion? Okay. So it's just like, there's a processing that needs to happen there for you before you can kind of like make meaning of it all potentially. So this is just knowing this stuff about yourself is what I'm trying to get at for you guys. Leah, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, so after you explained like people that are sensing tell a story from their past, like that makes sense with my description, because I made a snowman with my boys last week, and we were pretending they were waving at the cars going by. So it was definitely a past experience. And when I tell them bedtime stories, they think they're new things, but they're really just things that I've done in the past. And I just make the characters are new names, but they're things that I've done in the past. So
yeah. No, so that's super helpful. I'm going to move us on here and I'm going to share my screen again. Oops, there we go. Can you guys see my screen okay? All right, good. All right. I am now going to talk a little bit about thinking and feeling. So if we're taking in information, either it's sensing or it's intuition, however we do that, we take in this information. Now we're going to make a decision about it. And I'm going to just pull up the chat here so that I have that available if I need it. All right. So thinking and feeling is all about how the criteria we use when we make a decision. So thinking is using the decision-making criteria that's objective. So it's trying to find something outside of ourselves that's going to help us make a decision. So they use things like drawing straws, weighing out lists of pros and cons, any sort of like objective criteria to help them make decision. So they're looking for reasonableness in the decision making and in the criteria. Results are really important to people with a preference for thinking. So they're results oriented, and they have this cause and effect kind of thinking, like if we do this, then that will happen. If we do that, then this will happen. And that's that thinking versus feeling, because feeling is going to use a different set of criteria. What thinking and feeling are not is like feeling is not emotional and thinking is not unemotional. We will see folks with a preference for feeling tend to have their feelings will live closer to the surface. So they might be more readily expressible, whereas people with a preference for thinking, they do have those same feelings. They just live a little lower and a little less expressed in life. And so especially when it comes to decision making, people will, with a preference for feeling, will tend to draw their values and relationships to the forefront when it comes to decision making. So it's a much more subjective form of decision making. It's like, what do I value? What does the group value? What does that other person value? And this relationship is so important to me that I want to find common ground. My goal is not to get to the right answer. My goal is to find common ground so that we can move forward together. Whereas a preference for thinking, their goal is to get to the right answer, the best answer. It does not mean that they don't bring people along. They want to bring people along, but they do it more in a sense of being able to like present objective criteria in their communication. So they're going to present truth over tact. Whereas people with a preference for feeling are really looking to find that common ground. So they're going to be more tactful to see if they can find out where it is that there's a common decision that can be made. So they're not always trying to convince people of a particular decision, but they're trying to get people to agree on a particular decision. So they have a little bit more of an empathetic orientation to the way that they do decision making. So I'm just going to give you an example here too of decision making when it comes to, so my husband Bernard and I have been married 15 years. When we got married, I had two kids, 15 and 5, I think it was, 15 and 5. 12 and 5, something like that. So I had two kids. They were some ages. One, my daughter lived down in the basement. Her bedroom was down in our basement. We had a split level house. She lived down in the basement, and my son was upstairs with me. And one of the things that I wanted when we moved into a house together, when we got married, is I wanted all my kids to be on the same level, especially with my daughter being more in her teenage years. I wanted to be able to have her in with the family and not isolating in the basement. So one of my criteria for the new house that we were going to buy was that 3 bedrooms needed to be on one level. Also, I have a preference for extroversion. And so in that, I wanted a house that had an open space so that when people were interacting or we had people over, I would be able to be in the kitchen cooking and still interacting with everybody that was in my home for whatever activity we were there for. My criteria for making my decision was about values and was about relationships. My husband's criteria was quite different. And so when he was looking for a house, what he would do is he would go out to the Ramsey County website and find out what the property value is on a particular house that we were looking at. And he would calculate what the value per square foot was on every house that we were looking at. And he would compare the value of the houses. He would also get onto Google and he would find out the driving distance between where that house was at and how far he was going to have to drive to get to work. We both had a different set of criteria that was our first foot forward in how we wanted to purchase that home. So for me, it was a very much a values relational kind of criteria. Did I care about how much we paid per square foot? Yes. And I certainly didn't want my husband driving long distances to work, but it was a secondary criteria foot forward, and what is the criteria you use in that moment. My husband also cared very my social time, but it was his secondary. Scenarios, just notice whether you feel more blue or more green in your responses to these scenarios, and then we'll figure out where you guys feel like you land. So thinking and feeling, all right, you've just won 2 tickets to a concert or a sporting event. All right, you got 2 tickets, and this isn't a really good scenario for our current like environment of social isolation, but anyway, you've got 2 tickets. How would you decide which friend to take with you? You can't automatically take your spouse or your significant other. So you got to take a friend with you, somebody where it's going to actually cause you to have to think hard about who it is that you're going to take with you. Put yourself in that scenario. Would you draw straws or put everyone's name in a hat? Blue. Or would you green? Think of the one who has never been or is having a tough time. Would you, blue, not care what people think of who you choose, or green, ask people's input on how you should decide? Last one for this one. Would you sell the ticket and make money off the deal, or would you give both tickets away because it's too hard to pick which friend to take with you? All right, so that's scenario number 1. Blue, more blue or more green? I'm going to give you another scenario here. Let's say that you're a team captain and you're choosing your players for like a community sports game of some kind, and you're choosing your players. How would you choose your team? Blue, you would choose all your best players right away, or green, you would choose as many of your friends as you can. Blue, you would swing a deal to get the best players if you also have to get the worst, or green, you would take the kid who always gets left out right away. Blue, you would have a great time if your team wins, and green, you would have a great time if everyone gets along. All right, so think about your blues and your greens and how many blues and greens you had. Go back to that pre-work exercise or any of your assessments that you took and type in the chat, what do you think your preference is, thinking or feeling? You can put U for undecided if you're kind of feeling like you're in the middle. We've got a lot of preferences for feeling in this group. It's interesting, actually, this is the one pair of the Myers-Briggs 4 pairs that where gender difference actually plays out. So gender difference makes 0 impact on any of the other pairs. But on thinking and feeling, the US adults are 50% thinking and 50% feeling. It's an even split with US adults. Until you put gender into the equation, 60% of US females have a preference for feeling, and only 40% of US males have a preference for feeling. It flips when it comes to thinking. Thinking is 60% male and 40% female. And Jennifer, you say thinking, but have learned to be feeling. And this is what I notice a lot in women, is because we are, like, our culture tends to nurture women to the behaviors that are preferences for feelings. And so a lot of times women with a preference for thinking will oftentimes have to take on the trait of feeling because it's expected of them. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic that sometimes can happen. The same can happen actually for men. So my son has a preference for feeling, but he had really struggled in high school because of his preference for feeling. And he was always trying to help people and bring people together and find common ground. And he was in sports and in a competitive environment where that was really not as socially acceptable in his circles with his other guys. So he really struggled with his preference for feeling in those years and trying to figure out how to be more of a thinking preference in that environment. And so this is the one where gender differences can play out a little bit more. All right, I'm gonna move us on to the last one, which is, whoops. I'm gonna take us back, my PowerPoint slide went back, and then we'll go to a stretch break here in just a second. All right, back to the slide right here. The last one is judging and perceiving. And so this is really about how we like to organize our world. So think about the way that you like to organize the world around you or orient yourself into the world around you. People with a preference for judging tend to organize their outer world. So their goal is to bring structure and organization to the chaos that they might experience. They enjoy that. They prefer that. People with a preference for perceiving tend to let their outer world emerge. And so their approach is more oriented towards gathering more information. So back to that sensing and intuition that we were talking about earlier, people with a preference for perceiving, whether it's a sensing or an intuition interest in how they gain information, they love to live in that world. So whether it's gathering more data or whether it's thinking about more ideas, perceiving loves to live in that sensing and intuition world. So they're gathering more information. They're always asking more questions to gather more information. And when you hear them communicating, they're sharing information. You might even point blank ask someone with a preference for perceiving to make a decision, and they will instead share with you more information. Because that's the world they live in. They live in the world of information. People with a preference for judging, on the other hand, they really like to live in that world of decision making. So whether it's a thinking or a feeling preference for decision making, they love to live in that world. So you will hear them talking from decision to decision to decision. So when you ask them you ask them for more information, they may share with you the information along with their judgment call about what that information means. Because the purpose of information is so that you can make a decision about it. So they love to bring things to closure, and they love to make more of a decision about it. So I'm going to give you a little scenario here that I want you guys to kind of plot yourself on this continuum that's going on here. All right, so let's assume that you have a project. Think of it as a project at work or a project in school if you're in school, but it's assigned in January. So in January, you get this assignment, you know what you've got to do, and it's due in May. So you've got a lot of time in order to complete this assignment. You've got to gather information, you've got to set deadlines, you maybe have to involve other people in the process. But as of March 15th, you're at your halfway point. Where are you with the project? If the project is done and you're already on to the next one and you're thinking of your next project, then you're number one. Let's say that you started the project. You're not done with it yet, but you've got research going. You've got your materials together. You're number two. Number three is, okay, I've got my outline, I've got my timeline, I've got my plans done, but I haven't actually started with the project yet, but I know what I'm going to do and when I'm going to do it. Number four is you're thinking about it. You got lots of ideas. You're engaging in lots of conversations with other people about your ideas. It's constantly going around in your head. You're reading things. You're gathering more information about it, but you've done nothing. That's a 4. And number 5 is you're working on it last minute. You are following the inspiration. You have been thinking about it the whole time. And now all of a sudden, because that deadline is looming over you, all the inspiration just starts flowing and your energy is ignited and you just like, it's just flowing out of you and you're getting it all done at the last minute. And number 6 is you delivered it late because you had to add in a new last minute idea before you could turn it in. So why don't you guys go ahead in the chat box and type in what number most likely represents your preference. All right, so we got lots of 2s and 3s. 1 through 3 really represents more of a judging preference because all of these are about giving structure or putting structure or making some decisions to help you through the process. Number 4 and 5 and 6 represent a little bit more of that perceiving preference because it is about gathering more information before you take action and living in that information zone. People with a preference for judging tend to love that decisive decision-making closure process, get it done, and then they move on to the next decision. People over here in this 4, 5, and 6, actually decisions can cause a little bit of anxiety in the sense that, it's like, oh, but if I make a decision now and I don't have all the information that I need to make the decision, and So this is one of the things that is like, they can live with a little bit of buyer's remorse, because after they make a decision, because at some point you have to make a decision, after they make a decision, they can live in that angst place. Is like, well, what if I missed out on that one piece of information that I should have had, could have had, and didn't get? And so they will tend to revisit the decisions over and over again. So even if you don't fit in this 4, 5, 6 category, I'm sure you know someone in your life who does. So what I want to do now is give you guys, I'm going to bring us all back online. I'm going to stop sharing my screen again. I want to give you guys just a chance to like turn off your video, do a little bit of a stretch break, and then we're going to come back and talk a little bit about communication styles. If you have questions as you're taking your break, jot them down so that because we will have a Q&A time more towards the end, and feel free to jot them in the chat box as well. But you guys can turn your videos off, go stretch break, bathroom break, do all of that, and then we'll come back here and let's come back here in 4 minutes. Dive into sharing the screen here again. So there's 4 different communication styles that make this up. And so you can turn to page 2 of your handouts if you've got that handy. I'm going to briefly talk about these communication styles, but I'm not going to read through all of this stuff. This stuff is for your reference. I want to just give us a high level understanding of these 4 styles. And then I want to take it down and break it down into some practical examples. And then I want us to come back in a group discussion and talk about your practical examples so that we can actually talk about what are some strategies that we can put in place for real world situations that you guys are experiencing to enhance communication. It's just one of those foundational things. So there's 4 different communication styles. If you look at your handout, problem solver is the first one, and that's that combination of sensing and intuition. So it's sensing and intuition together. So what you'll hear about that, no, I'm sorry, sensing and thinking. Sensing and thinking. Problem solver is sensing and thinking. So they talk about facts and sequence and step-by-step communications, and then they make decisions on the basis of efficiency and relevancy. So that's what you're seeing here with this problem solver. Everything is a problem to be solved. So that's how they communicate. So they are going to be if you present them with a problem, it is their invitation to solve your problem. So that's the efficiency and relevancy is what they're all about. So that's our problem solver. Their opposite, I'm just going to go kitty corner here down to their opposite, is the bridge builder. And that's intuition for how they take in information, and it's feeling for how they make decisions. So this is what I was just talking about with me. This is me. I speak in metaphors and analogies. It's all about bringing people together. So I ask a lot of questions, which is what's hard for my husband sometimes, is because I'm asking a lot of personal and relational questions. But because he lives up in this domain over here between problem solver and strategic thinker, I'm asking him stuff that's harder to access. It's harder for him to access those personal, relational, emotional values because they live deeper. Remember, in that thinking, those things live deeper. They have them, but they live further down. For people with a preference for feeling, they live more closer to the surface. So my natural style is to ask him more questions, to brainstorm, to speak in metaphors, or to use lots of words to explain what I'm thinking. And I can lose him really easily because I'm asking him questions he can't readily access the answers to. And I'm brief, practical, plain language, brief and concise communication is what we're talking about over here. So the strategic thinker is similar to the problem solver in that domain of thinking for decision making, but they tend to be more intuitive. So they're future focused, they're noticing patterns and trends, they're forecasting out to the future, and they're focused on their ultimate goal and their future vision. They are ahead in the clouds, and they are very future oriented, which makes it challenging for them then to communicate to their opposite, which is the compassionate connector. The compassionate connector shares feeling with the bridge builder, but the compassionate connector is in the details like the problem solver. So they're very much about common sense, practical people's needs that need to be met. So if they're going to solve a problem, they're going to solve a problem that involves meeting people's needs. They notice the impact on others, they see how things land on others, and they're always asking questions to gather helpful details. They're always looking at demonstrating empathy and offering a plan. So they want to be able to help people out. And they do tend to like know a lot of stuff and gather a ton of information to always have the resources at their fingertips so that they can meet people's needs. So if you were to think about all four of these in just like an analogy metaphor, because that's just what I'm going to do, let's talk about like coffee. Coffee is something that's very popular in our world, so most people can relate to it. So I'm going to use coffee. So if you have a meeting at work, and this meeting involves all four people of these different communication styles, they're all going to look at coffee just a little bit differently. If you want to bring coffee to the meeting, the problem solver is going to say, okay, if we need to bring coffee, how much coffee do we need? What's the budget for the coffee, and who's going to get the coffee, and when is it going to arrive? A strategic thinker is going to say, bring the coffee, and they will come. It's strategic, big picture thinking. Your bridge builder is like, great, we're going to have coffee. Can we take a coffee break so we can have some time to chit chat and get to know each other a little bit over coffee? The compassionate connector is going to say, all right, I know exactly the place where we need to get coffee, and I know what kind of coffee you like, and I know what kind of coffee you like, and I know what kind of coffee you like. And I'm going to make sure everybody's needs are met in this meeting with the right kind of coffee. So that's the difference that you'll see just in a metaphor format with these four communication styles. So I want you to be thinking here. I'm going to do one more thing before I have you guys think about which communication style you feel like is your number one communication style. Now you can go back and look at the pre-work that you've done and the assessments that you've done. And this is the combination of those two middle letters. And so if you put those together, you could actually drop yourself into one of these quadrants. But I also want you to pay attention to what we're talking about in these communication styles. Which do you feel like is your number one? And which do you feel like is your number two? But I want to talk about two more things before we dive into that. And one is that it is important for us to know our communication style and how we tend to communicate. But then it is also important for us to understand how other people communicate. And so while we can't know what their preferences are, we can observe behaviors that might indicate what it is that they prefer in communication, and then adapt our communication style to theirs. And so here is some tips on like how to adapt or connect to them on the basis of their communication style. So I think I have this on page 3 of your handouts. This is where you have access to this information. And going back to trying to connect with others, it is really important for us to be able to understand, like for me and my husband, to understand our different communication styles. But when making a decision, this becomes really important on how to involve. The best decisions are made when we can involve all of these 4 different styles into a way of making a decision. So if you have the problem solver involved, the problem solver is going to help you get at your analytical approach to the details. They're going to help you get to the bottom of what is really going on here, because they're going to know the data. People with a preference for strategic thinking in their communication are going to be able to cast a vision for you and tell you where you're going. So when you're talking to them, you want to draw out their big picture. So for these guys, you want to be able to speak to the pros and cons and speak to the analysis that a problem solver is going to have naturally. When you're talking to a strategic thinker, you want to get thinking bigger. So you want to ask them future-oriented questions. You don't want to get to skip the small talk, or the redundancy is super important for a strategic thinker. So when you're talking to a strategic thinker, think like this. And if you are a bridge builder or a compassionate connector, this is really important, because bridge builders and compassionate connectors do not do this naturally. You need to, with a strategic thinker, give them the bottom line, and then if necessary, add in your supporting evidence or your supporting reasoning. They like the bottom line first. So don't repeat. If this is my husband's thing about, like, I should be able to tell these students at age 22 that they can, this is what you need to do, and they should be able to do it without having to repeat it. That's a strategic thinker way of thinking, is because they don't do repeating. It's just like they don't do that. But asking them questions that help them think outside of the box. Now, the compassionate connector, if you really want to connect with them, you need to think practically, think common sense, think boots on the ground, and connect with them actually while they're doing something. Because the compassionate connector is the resourceful person that always sees what people's need, and they go ahead and they do it. They're multitaskers. Speak to them in detail and give it to them chronologically, and you're going to have a lot more success at having them understand what it is that you're talking to them about and what it is that you want them to do. So this is why when a strategic thinker comes and talks to a compassionate connector, they're opposite. One of the biggest breakdowns is that a strategic thinker is always talking about the goal. We want to in 6 months, we want to look like this. And they expect the compassionate connector to be able to see that and then put the steps together and figure out how to do it, and they can't. You need to be able to give them the steps and then give them encouragement and positive feedback along the way. That's super important for a compassionate connector because they work so hard. They put so much heart and soul into what they do, and meeting needs is that all three of these other communication styles need to remember that and give them practical, tangible, positive feedback. So not the just like pat on the back, nice job kind of feedback, but something concrete that they can hook their teeth into that says, this is what is so valuable about what you just contributed in this situation. And for bridge builders, to be able to just like, you know what, some of the best ways that you can actually connect with a bridge builder is to invite them to share what they're thinking. They love to brainstorm. They love to journey down the tangents. To be able to give them the space to do that can be a powerful gift that you can give to a bridge builder communicator. Some of the best conversations that my husband and I have, for me, the ones that are most fulfilling and energizing for me, are the kinds of conversations where he just simply asks me questions about what I'm thinking about and just lets me talk. And some of the most helpful conversations that I give to him are when I actually paraphrase or bottom line what he's saying. So if he's expressing something and I can just bottom line it for him, that's one of the biggest gifts that I can give him in the conversation. The last thing that I'm going to do before we dive into our exercises is talk about how to tone down your own style when you're in a communication with others, because we have a natural way of approaching our communication with others. Sometimes that communication can be more challenging if we don't tone back our own style. So a story of this is I had my favorite boss in all of my work experience. She was amazing. She was a strategic thinker. And we used to have just these amazing conversations because we could play off of each other because we shared that intuition, but our decision-making processing was so different. And we had just this awesome interconnection, interrelationship in the way that we related to each other. But one of our biggest communication challenges was that I would ramble, let's just call it what it is, as a bridge builder, whoops. I would ramble. There we go. I would ramble. And so we had this rapport that we had built up over time. And so when I would ramble, I would hear this, yep, yep, yep. She would just simply say, yep, yep, yep. And I was like, okay, there's my cue. I'm rambling. And I would tone it down and I would get to the bottom line. And it was just this nice little interplay that we had. Now we had really great rapport. And we had really great conversations about it. We had conversations about our communication differences and some of the challenges. But because of the nature of the rapport that we had, when she said, yep, 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 I didn't take it personal. I knew why she was doing it and what she was asking for. And we had this simple little interchange that when I started to ramble, she would say, yep, yep, yep. Now to this day, my husband picked up on that and he'll start doing that with me too. And he's just like, yep, yep, yep. So now all of you know the secret. You all have my secret. If I'm rambling, you know what to do, right? Just say, yep, yep, yep. And that'll help Annie just tone it down. But all of these have little ways that we can tone down our own style to interrelate with others. All right, so now I want you to go back to handout page number 2. And I want you to just jot down what is your number 1 and what is your number 2, so you have that in your head as you're going forward. I'm going to give us 2 examples to set up our little activity that we're going to do here. And I'm just going to talk them through just to give us an idea of how to shape our style to the needs of the other person that we're interacting with or communicating with. And then I'm going to have us go back on screen as a group, and we're going to talk about maybe some of our own communication challenges and see if we can use some of what we've learned here to be able to shape our communication. So now that you've got that down, I'm going to first talk about Tammy. So these 2 stories are combinations of people that I know that I've worked with or that I've had interactions with in some of my work. And I want to introduce you to them. And I want you to be thinking as I talk about them, what you think their communication style might be. And once you think you know what their communication style might be, go ahead and jot it in the chat box in here. But this is Tammy. Tammy is a mompreneur. Doesn't she look like a mompreneur? she has a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old. Both kids are in school. One's preschool and the other's in kindergarten. So she saw this as her prime opportunity to dive in and build her business more. So she's putting more hours in and putting more energy towards building her business. She's always juggled a lot of things. She's a natural juggler. She just like can see the details and manage the details like an amazing like Wonder Woman. But now her kids are both at home with her right now. So she's trying to be a kindergarten teacher. She's trying to be a preschool teacher. She's trying to be a mompreneur. She's trying to be a wife. She's trying to hold it all together. And it's taken a pretty big toll on her because she is hyper aware of other people's needs. And she really, really gives attention to that. She has an intense empathy for her kids who are both struggling with the changes in their own lifestyle. And she, when she sees a need, she feels compelled to meet it. The challenge is that the needs are overwhelming right now. And so what do you guys think her communication style is based on what you know of her and looking at this picture? Do you think that she's a strategic thinker, problem solver, compassionate connector, or a bridge builder? Anybody have any thoughts? You can guess wrong. Yep, you guys are getting it. She's a compassionate connector. So if we think about Tammy and how can we communicate to her in her language, so that now you can look at page number 3. And on page number 3 are just like different strategies that we could use. And page number 2 has strategies that we could use to connect with Tammy. And here's some ways that we could connect with her. One of the things you could do is send her a gift card for takeout. Remember, she's always giving to meet practical needs for others. One of the best ways that you can care for her or encourage her in a time like this is practical, tangible. So for a compassionate connector, actions are always more powerful than words. It's not that they don't appreciate the words, but the practical, tangible, meeting their need can be a really helpful thing. Remind her, see, this is where words do come in handy. Remind her that she's a good mom and give her a practical example of how she's a good mom. So they appreciate compliments, and encouragement is so valuable, but it needs to be something tangible. It needs to be something specific and real. Listen to her and then send a referral her way for her business to show that, you know, you're hearing what she has to say, and then you're taking action to meet that. Another way that you could do it, I hear this a lot from compassionate connectors, is that come back and ask about the details that I shared the first time. Remember what I told you. And that's that past orientation of that sensing but to ask them and to check in with them about details can be something really helpful. And you guys, if you have ideas of how to help or what you could do to encourage a compassionate connector in this, go ahead and throw them in the chat box too. And we'll have more time to talk practically about these, but this is certainly not a complete list of a way to support a compassionate connector who needs encouragement, but it's certainly one of a couple ways that you could do that. All right, I want to introduce you to one more person before we dive into your own. This is Jenny. And I want you to be thinking about, what encouragement might be helpful for Jenny. Jenny has never done a race before. She never saw herself as a runner, and she never really liked running, but she set a goal for herself, and she broke it down into steps, and she laid out her plan so that she could make it happen. And she researched which race she wanted to do. She set out her training plan, and she got her accountability on, and she had some people support her. She hired a trainer to help her. She found out everything that she could about preparing for that race. With her steps down and her routine on, she started in, and when obstacles came up, like the gym closing, she took it to the street and she figured out how to overcome the obstacles, and she just went for it. With determination and drive, she just saw her plan through. So what do you think would be her communication style based on like what she's doing, what her preferences might be? Is she a problem solver, strategic thinker, bridge builder, or compassionate connector? What do you think? Yep, Jenny is a problem solver. Yay. Yep, she's a problem solver. So again, what would we do to encourage Jenny at a time like this? Questions that you can ask that would be helpful are, what made your plan work? Because they are, again, results oriented. That sensing and that thinking combined, problem solvers are very results oriented. So asking them a question that talks about their process, their plan, or their results are really great questions to ask them, and just let them talk about it. Another question you might ask is, what was your obstacle and how did you overcome it? Because they love to be able to help other people solve problems as well. So if they can use their experience to help someone else, that's going to be a powerful, validating thing for a problem solver. Another thing you could do is notice the detail and concisely acknowledge it. I can't emphasize enough concisely, because I've done in workshops, real-time activities, having everybody give feedback or encouragement to the different personality styles and the communication styles. I hear over and over and over again from the problem solvers is they don't really appreciate communication. That is appreciation, unless it's super concise. So don't get wordy with them. They don't need all the fluff. So you might want to say something really simple like, your follow through is admirable, or your commitment or your dedication is amazing. Just something really simple and concise that has really a focused message is really helpful for them. Another thing for a problem solver is come and watch your race to show support. Just be there. So those are some of the things that you could do. And again, you can throw a couple other ideas up in the chat box if you have other ideas for how you might encourage Jenny. So that's like, it's adapting our communication style to their communication style. So what I'd like to do is just take a minute to check in with you guys. Like, do you have like a story that you want to tell of someone that you're relating with, or maybe even your own story that we could learn? How do we communicate? How do we connect with someone whose style is different than our own?
Yeah, I had to do this. I did this for a work project because, well, I did it personally because I was really struggling with my immediate supervisor, and I couldn't communicate why, why I was frustrated about different things. And I'm a strategic thinker. So that brief, concise, and he was very like, so how was your weekend? And what did you do? And I was just like, stop. No, I'm not. I'm talking about my weekend. I got a job to do, and here's the deal. And I always felt bad because I felt like, okay. I'm like, well, it was fine, and we did this or this, and then I'd want to jump right into it. And so now I also know that when I'm with someone that needs that first, like, how was your weekend? How are you? Like, I have to force myself to do that because I'm always about the work.
Yep.
And yeah, they need to know how the weekend was.
Yeah, it's almost like you kind of have to like think about it strategically as a strategic thinker. Is you step back and you think about it in a strategic way, as like, okay, I'm going to carve out this much space because I know that that's what they need, so that I can get to whatever it is that I need to get done. And I do encourage people to, like if you have someone that you're working with, or I see this a lot in team meetings, like when you have group meetings together, is sometimes you can end up spending so much time doing check-in around personal stuff. Problem solvers for sure will be the ones that will check out in that meeting so fast. So you really, like, if your job is to facilitate those team meetings, your job is to make sure that that personal connection time is there and present for those who need it, but it doesn't take over the whole time, because that can be really devastating to problem solvers and strategic thinkers if it gets a little overwhelming. Anybody else have like challenges in life, relationships, family, work, that you're going, I don't get this person. How should I talk to them?
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I guess so. I recognize in this that I'm the compassionate connector, and like everything you said made so much sense. that I hadn't realized before, but I guess I don't know where my sister falls in one of them, and just noticed that she and I constantly disconnect in communication, where I think that I'm more like, I want to say like factual in my thinking, and then like sensing emotions from people. And with her, like I'll say, I don't know, try to talk about like the snowman thing, maybe I'm talking about a snowman, and then she suddenly starts talking about like carrots, because she's recognized like, oh, a snowman's carrot nose, and then like she's completely talking about something totally different. Like I see how she got there, but I'm like, how are you not understanding that I'm talking about a snowman? So I don't know, like, do you, and I know you don't know her necessarily, but even from that, do you recognize maybe how she connects or thinks and how we're disconnecting?
Well, what you're describing is the difference between sensing and intuition, and that sensing tend to have more of a step-by-step or a sequential communication.
Okay.
And intuition tends to have more of a random communication style, because the way that they communicate is in an interconnection of thoughts and patterns. So I mean, it's just, this is so classic actually for like the sensing is like they're going down their list of the conversation, and you're thinking, even as you're communicating, you're going like, okay, I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to say that, and then I'm going to say this, because there's a natural progression to how you communicate an idea, a concept, a thought, a story. But people with a preference for intuition, they like, you get to step 2 and they hear the carrot and it takes them over here to totally another point, and they're like, oh, I got to talk about that, and let's explore that. And so that's the disconnect that you have. And so what I really challenge people to do, one thing that you can do is just, if the both of you can get aware that that's how you communicate, like if she can be as aware as you are about how the differences are and how you communicate, so you just know when it's happening and you can call it out. That's my boss going, yep, yep, yep. It's her calling that out, something we both knew happened. And now because we know it happens and we do it differently, we can call it out. So it's a conversation that you can have. It's my husband and I, when we're having that conversation, and he's got to say, I'm thinking about that. When there's silence or there's dead space and I feel ignored, and I'm thinking about that. Or let me have a minute to think about that. So now we know those differences. So therefore we can actually acknowledge them and call them out. And then I think the other part to communication that's really powerful is then going, okay, when do you need to, as a preference for sensing, follow through your whole flow of thought, because you need to express something because it's important to you. And that's the power of this kind of stuff is because now you know this about yourself, you can ask for it.
Mm.
Or when is it that you need to adapt your style and follow the carrot nose story and go, you know what, my steps aren't as important. What's really important is for me to listen in. Okay, so tell me more about the carrot.
Hmm.
And so you have to, in the moment is going to be your discernment of deciding when is it important for me to follow my steps, and when do I want to just give her grace to follow her carrot.
Yeah, that's so helpful, because so often I feel frustrated, like, no, and I didn't even realize that I was following steps, but I'm like, no, I want to finish what we were talking about.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Annie, I have two kind of questions, thoughts. The first one is, I love what Cass brought up, because, maybe on our teams or, a spouse or a close friend, they would have enough awareness to be like, hey, take this quiz, and then we could sort of assess. And even when they don't, I feel like adults, maybe or maybe not, it's a little bit easier to identify this. But what about kids? Right, for younger kids, what does that look like to start to recognize these things, just like you did in your son? And then, a specific example for me is, even in my 4-year-old, I can sort of recognize, okay, I'm probably tend more towards the bridge builder or strategic, and then my daughter is the compassionate connector. And so, in that for instance, what does that look like even now to start to, so this question is more on a proactive sense.
Yep.
How can we take our relationship to the next level? What would that look like in my relationship with her on the strategic and then bridge builder?
Yeah.
Or you can just speak to kids in general, like when they're younger, identifying those things.
Yeah. I mean, personality, so there's the back up to the theory for a little bit, and then I'll go into the practical application. Backing up to the theory a little bit is Myers-Briggs theory says that your personality is not fully developed until you're about the age of 18. And so even teenagers who might take an assessment like Myers-Briggs at 14 or 15, it can be taken at an 8th grade reading level. So it's written at an 8th grade reading level. But if you take it that young, you're still playing with the nuances of your personality. You really will see most kids are pretty like tight into their dominant preference, whatever their dominant preference is, because there's 4 preferences on Myers-Briggs. So whatever their dominant preference is, that's usually pretty solid by age 5. So you will start seeing by age 4 or 5, you're going to start seeing them kind of starting to follow similar behavior patterns. That they become a preferred way of doing things. And so you can start noticing behaviors. With kids, I think it's always really important to be descriptive versus prescriptive when it comes to what you're noticing about their preferences. And I actually would say this even about other adults that you're working with, is that you're not going to like walk up to everybody that you know and say, take this little assessment so I can communicate with you. It would be weird to do that. But you are going to, as you get aware of these communication preferences, you're going to start noticing them in others based on their behavior. But their behavior is not always what they prefer. Because if you think about it, given a different context, we all behave just a little bit differently. And it might not be what we prefer, but it might be who we choose to be in that experience or in that situation. So you can still interact with people on the basis of what you see and what you observe in their behavior. Just recognize that it's a description versus a prescription of like, this is their preference. Well, no, this is how they're interacting with me right now. So with kids, we want to do the same kind of a thing. I think that I mean, my daughter, who is 8, definitely has some very distinctive personality traits that like kind of run pretty solid. So, I mean, I do relate to her on the basis of what I know about her personality and what she needs. And I think that is a really important thing for us to do in the basis of that. So like with Bridge Builder and Compassionate Connector from a parent versus a child, that's a great combination in the sense that you both share the feeling side of it. Probably what might be hard is that for your daughter is like very practical, tangible, highly interactive, highly tactile kinds of things which is true for most kids at age 5, 4 or 5 anyway, but that's going to be how she's going to interact or relate with the world. And so really being able, using the creativity that comes from intuition along with the like applying it, she's going to be able to give you the practical, tangible ways to be able to apply your ideas as you go forward with that. So I don't know if I really answered your question there specifically as it relates to parenting in general. So feel free for any of you to follow up or add to the question. And we can tackle this just a little bit more. I have more to say, but I want to make sure I'm going in a direction that's helpful for you guys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, feel free to keep jotting that in the chat if there's more on the parenting side of things. The next thing I wanted to just touch on and ask you about is, it was interesting because I think everyone was the feeling, if I remember, instead of the thinking. And you said that anyways, yeah, I don't see any thinkers. Thinking. Yeah, okay, Jennifer. And then, you said that was pretty common for women in general. Mm-hmm. So what would be some things for us to be extra aware of on the thinking side? So kind of the strengths and weaknesses, a little bit of the feeling.
Yeah, thinking versus feeling. I think one of the biggest challenges I hear from thinking communicators when they're interacting with feeling communicators is long-windedness and like using lots of words and taking it personal. Those are the 2 things that thinking people say is hard for them in interacting with feeling preferences. And Jennifer, you can feel free to like jot in, because I think you have the perspective of maybe a thinking preference, but you've had to like earn your stripes as a feeling behavior. So feel free to like jot in or jump in with what you know about just like that interaction between the thinking and the feeling, and what as feeling do we need to offer our thinking counterparts?
So I work with a lot of men, so actually this really works for me in my work environment. But I do know when I work with a few of my coworkers, and again, not trying to just paint a broad brush across everybody, but women that are obviously feeling sides. I do, like, I watch their facial expressions and I read on that. Like I start to sense and pick up on, oh, I'm being a little too factual, I'm going a little too fast, I'm going a little, yeah. So, but yeah, that is a huge one. And Brooke and I actually just talked about this. This was, okay, rabbit trail. So this was something that when my husband passed away, that God granted me, what I would say, we kind of talked about it, what I would say is now a gift, is when my husband passed away, I was sitting in the living room, I don't know, a couple weeks later, a month later, I don't remember time, I don't remember. But I had just this overwhelming open vision and understanding of Chuck's feelings and perspective of some of the fights that we kept having. Like God made me completely aware of what he was feeling and what he was sensing in that, even though we both were thinkers, that they're just like, he just opened that. So now the empathy side of it, or seeing both sides of the story, is really something that I've been able to pick up on more. And I was saying that too, when I did this test, I am an absolute thinker. Like I am every one of those marks, I'm a thinker. But when I read the sensing side or feeling side, I was like, oh, yeah, I do that. I do that. I do that. So those are things that, yes, I have absolutely learned how to do or been now made more aware of, in a gift kind of way that help me see that. And obviously I'm not great at it, but.
No, but I think that we all strive. I think that's what we all want to strive for. Like if we could all say that about, like, I know that this is my preference, but I've learned to do it this way for the sake of whoever it is in our life that we're doing that for. I mean, I think ultimately that's our goal with all of this, is not to be able to say, and I think one of the challenges with Myers-Briggs that I hear over and over and again is because it's an instrument that's based on opposites, it sets people, it can polarize people. And I have seen it used in the workplace in really difficult ways. Is like, well, people with a preference for feeling are conflict avoidant, and so they don't do conflict. And people with a preference for thinking are bullies. And any of those stereotypes that you get because of those differences, that to me is a misuse of the assessment for its intended purpose, and it's just simply unkind behavior and unhelpful. It does not help us get to whatever goal that we get to when we throw people in a box and then we add a negative label to that box. So I feel like a lot of people are resistant to the Myers-Briggs because of how it is a forced choice assessment. And so I think it's really always our goal in learning about ourselves to be able to go, this is who I am. And this is like how I then know how to ask for what I need. But then to be able to go, but I want to understand people who are different than me to such a degree that I can notice their facial expressions and change how I do what I do. I can know that bottom lining instead of like processing it all out loud is helpful for that other person, and then put into practice different strategies that help me do that. A lot of times I will write down what I want to communicate to my husband in my journal before I tell him, because it gives me an outlet to extrovert my processing, because writing can be a way to extrovert my processing before I have a conversation with him, so that when I go to him, I've already got my bottom line in place and I'm confident in my bottom line. And I've also got my thinking that lined up from behind it. And I mean, I feel like it's been one of the greatest gifts that I've had being married to Bernard as kind of a scientist and a heavy duty thinker, is that he's forced me to learn how to think. Not in a logical sense, but in terms of how I make decisions. He's forced me to actually get like more objective in the way that I make my decisions and the way I process my information. And I found that to be a really valuable tool in so many areas of my life. I do not think that I could do what I do for the leaders that I work with if it wouldn't have been for all that I've learned from walking my husband through this. Because I got to tell you right now, a lot of the leaders that I work with, who are leaders in nonprofit organizations, and they are having to look at a loss of their donations and having to maybe lay off some of their people. And you got to realize these people are family. They are not, these are Christian organizations where they really believe in their people and they want to invest in their people. They see them as like family, and here they are going to have to turn around and probably lay them off. And they're having to make some significant decisions about services that they can no longer provide to the people that they care for the most in the whole world. And they're having to make really tough decisions. If I hadn't learned the skill that I've learned from my husband of taking a step back and remaining objective, I wouldn't be able to be fully present with my clients like I'm able to be with them right now.
I'd like everyone to think about, you know, unless you have other clarifying questions or thing that you want to mastermind right now in your life, but regarding where we're at in the well intensive 5 months, thinking about, okay, where do I want to be in the next 3 months, in the next 6 months? Okay, this is maybe a strategic thinker right here, but based on the clarity that you're getting and where you want to go, if you can try to identify what is the number one relationship that I need in order to get where that is. So for some of you, it might be a relationship with your spouse because you need that partner like Leah. You guys need that partner in unity to make this thing happen. For another person, it might be like a key coworker. Sarah, I think about you and your firm and your law firm. Maybe there's another key partner, key person that you really need to leverage and connect with to go to the next level. Maybe it's an outside partner that you need to have or develop that relationship with to launch your idea. Whatever it is, again, like Cass, you mentioned a family member. So there's, you know, things with family members that because we're close to them in close proximity, that relationships, even if it doesn't have anything to do with our goal or what we're going at, it affects our progress, it affects our attitudes. And so if we could all just identify like who is that one person and how can I either mend that relationship or how can I take it to the next level? So we can just really break this down really practical to exactly where we're at in this process regarding relationships. Maybe for some of us, it's a kid. I know you all value family, and maybe it's like, well, I'm on the path to reach this goal, but I don't want to sacrifice my relationship with my family in the process. So I want to make sure that my relationship with my family member or this friend is super strong so that as I'm going to where I'm going, I don't leave them in the dust. That would be probably one of my personal examples, right? Like I want to value my family as I'm progressing. So if you want to share that in the chat, go ahead and share that just to like speak it out and identify that person. If that's coming to mind right now. And that also might give you ideas of like, okay, yep, this is my person who I want to really be intentional with and take this relationship to the next level. Maybe that gives you some fodder for asking Annie a question or you know, figuring out, even with the information that we're learning today, how we can start to apply this and honor their strengths, their weaknesses, and then communicate more clear. Not all at once, people. And I know there's sometimes when we hear all this information, it's just like a lot to process, and it's difficult sometimes to connect it to a current situation. And sometimes that comes after too, after we have time to process and mull all this over, then we start to see things clearly. I would also love, Annie, I don't know if we've talked about this, but you know, having you back, right? So we can kind of continue this process as well as we journey through.
One of the things I like to do when I'm in a challenging relationship or a key relationship like what you guys are talking about is just to grab the like sheet and plot them, like physically plot them on the sheet. So like if I'm having I actually have a mentor that I'm working with and I meet with him fairly regularly. He's a strategic thinker and I'm a bridge builder. So I would plot him I'd plot Dave as a strategic thinker and Annie as a bridge builder. And then I go, okay, so what are some of my communication challenges with him? And like this bullet out, okay, there's this communication challenge, there's this communication challenge, and then there's this communication challenge, which I probably couldn't come up with 3 for him, but I might be able to come up with 2 for him. And then go, okay, now looking at the list of strategies for a bridge builder and how to adapt my style, what's one thing that I want to try doing differently in the way that I communicate with him? And then maybe looking at like what's important to him is like, what is one thing that I maybe need to give him grace for that I haven't been giving him grace for? And so that can just like, it can be like, if you just like take the relationship and you just kind of like on page number 2, where it's like all that stuff is listed out, just put their name by the side of it and read through that and go, oh, okay. Yep. Mm-hmm. You know, I would say if I think about my situation with Dave, as a strategic thinker, one of the things that's hardest for me is that he can go from idea to idea and give me so many ideas that I can't act on, that I get overwhelmed by them. Because he's a strategic thinker and he's always out there and he's always got the next idea. So he comes to the meeting with 3 or 4 ideas for me, and I have capacity to take action on 1. But I'm a bridge builder, so I'm going to be really tactful. And I'm not going to be really direct about that. So I think one of my challenges in communicating with him is that I haven't been as direct as to say, you know what, I need to be done on time and I have capacity for 1 idea. And I think it would be really, so here I am, I'll mastermind for you what I should do. My takeaway is like, I think I should just like maybe write out a script of how I would communicate that to him and be really intentional about how I want to say that to him based on what I know is important to him. I think his competency as a strategic thinker is really important. So for me to validate what he knows and his competency would be really important in that communication. To not be wordy, but to get to the point quickly would be really important in that communication. So my tactfulness as a bridge builder can hook me up, because I can be so tactful that I'm like weaving my way around the communication. And by the time I get to my point, I've lost my strategic thinker and they don't even know what I was actually asking for anyway. So I think that if I wrote my script out ahead of time of what I wanted to ask for, that would be one of the biggest wins that I could create out of this kind of a thing. So does anybody got an example like that they would like to work through?
Annie, there's a couple in the chat too, of Leah, for instance, said her relationship with her husband, bringing that communication with him to the next level. So I don't know, Leah, if there's anything specifically that would be helpful for you to unpack, or if that's just what you know you need to do and you feel like you have the tools to do that.
I feel like I have the tools. I'm not exactly sure what he is fully on the Myers-Briggs. I know he's done it before. He had to do it for work at past jobs. But I know that he's more of a, intuition, where he has this grand big picture, and it takes me a while because I want to like figure out the steps to get to that grand picture. And so it takes me a while to get on board, and then I'm like, okay, let's do this. And then all of a sudden he's on to this next grand idea, and I'm like, wait, what happened to this idea? Like, and then I got to get back on this idea. And so it stresses me out. But he's all like, what? Well, that was just an idea. Like, now we're on to this idea. So, and we kind of know that about each other too. And so we've talked about it, but just like, you know, for real, we're on this mission now. And we kind of have the, like, okay, no more big grandiose ideas, but that's totally how he is. He wants to project and think about the future. So yeah, just working on how to do that together dynamically. It's crazy.
So probably maybe even a difference between compassionate connector and strategic thinker. So let's just imagine that he's a strategic thinker for the sake of conversation. Like, as you look at the quadrants, what is one thing that you might say, I could do this differently in my communication, and maybe here's one thing that I need to give him grace for?
Okay, yeah.
I mean, as you're looking at it, do you see anything that, like, even now? Well, we're gonna make you work at real time. Sorry, if you're uncomfortable, just say stop it.
No, it's okay. You want me to look at the how I can
handout, you know, this handout here, and just plot yourself down here as compassionate connector and plot him up
Okay.
as strategic thinker. Look at the words and go based on this being my style as compassionate connector. What is one thing in his style being strategic thinker? What's one thing that I might want to shift about the way I naturally communicate to relate to him differently?
I guess probably ask more questions, like curious questions, versus like, what are the exact steps we need to get there? So that's probably something that would be good. Like when he has ideas, just like ask more questions about, oh, we could do this, or instead of how do we do that? Because that's usually what I'm asking. How are we going to get there? He doesn't care about the steps.
The question is huge. That shift in the question would be huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, what I hear from strategic thinkers a lot is just like, can you ask me a question that helps me build on my idea? That's the greatest affirmation you can give me, is a question that helps me build on the idea I already have. They love that.
Yeah, I totally see that, because now I see some of the questions I ask are kind of like killing. They're dream killers.
Yep. And then the converse side of that would be is just like okay, so there are times that the how-to question matters. So when do we bring in the how-to question? But
yeah.
So what do you mean, since we're talking about compassionate communicator and strategic thinker, and I'm a strategic thinker, and I'm thinking the person I need to work with is a compassionate connector. What do you mean by, so on the page 3 of the handout, try these strategies to connect with others. What does it mean by connect with them while they multitask?
Oh, see, compassionate connectors are always doers. So they're always getting things done, and they're doing things. So they see the practical needs and how it needs to get done. And so sometimes they feel like the big picture dreaming is an interruption to their ability to actually accomplish a task. So if they're doing something, and it depends on kind of like the context of the doing, but if they're doing an activity, if you can sit down next to them and do it with them and then talk big picture while they're doing the activity, while they're getting something done, they sometimes, and it just depends on the context, but they can be more receptive to it. Another thing I've noticed, my son is a compassionate connector. And one of the things that actually helps me connect with him more is when we talk while he's driving. Isn't that interesting? Because he's doing something, and he when he's engaged, when he's physically engaged with a task, his brain actually seems to be willing to have conversations that go to a deeper place, which is what I'm looking for. So I don't know what that multitasking is for that other compassionate connector. And some of you here who are compassionate connectors can maybe speak to this a little bit more than I can. But that's what I've heard a lot is compassionate connectors are like, I'll go out for a coffee with you and hang out and have a conversation with you. But that's usually to talk about practical, real world stuff that's going on in your life is how they found that to be useful. And when big picture dreaming over a cup of coffee is not it's like they want to get to the task. So any other compassionate connectors that would add to that?
Yeah, that's definitely, oh, go ahead, Kath.
Sorry. Yeah, actually that's even helpful for me to recognize, because I notice sometimes when people want to go get coffee, I'm like, I don't have time for that. But I also want to see them. And so I don't know, it's almost like I'd rather go for a walk with them, because that feels productive to me. Or like I'm outside and I'm filling that tank, and I'm feeling like a little bit of an exercise tank as well, versus like sitting for coffee. So I don't know, I noticed that that's like a task thing for me, and I don't know if that's more.
So you said you're a compassionate connector?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yep. This is plugging in. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I have heard that. I have one of my dearest friends for like over 20 years is a compassionate connector, and she hates going for coffee with me. She loves going for walks with me. So it's so funny because I do have friends that like will just sit down and have coffee with me, and then other friends who are like, yeah, let's go work out, let's go walk, let's do anything physical, and then I'm happy to connect with you. We've got a
That's
question
really funny.
chat here from Laura with the person I posted about we're both compassionate connectors. What are the pros and cons of having the same communication style? Because we're still somewhat different because we're different people. Totally, totally, totally. So can there be communication or miscommunication, conflicts, stuff like that with people that have the same style? Absolutely, yes. And there can be even challenges too. And so like I've heard, I've done some like marriage stuff with folks that are like both bridge builders. And so they're married and they're both bridge builders. And so they're like, you know, how do we find out what the challenges are in communication? I did one premarital class. Oh my gosh, this was so funny because they were both bridge builders and they're like, and they'd never fought. And they were like, this means that we're never going to argue. This is so great. And I just wanted to like, here's my card. Call me 6 months into your marriage, because having the same communication style means nothing about conflict or how much you will have conflict, or you can still have miscommunications. It just means that you have the similar way of taking in information, but you might take in different information. You both have a preference for sensing, but this piece of data is really important to me, and that piece of data is really important to you. I'm observing this, and you're observing that. I see this as the root cause of the problem, and you see that as the root cause of the problem, and now we're in conflict over content because we're seeing different kinds of information. In addition to that, you've also got like feelings as your criteria. So let's say you both have preference for feelings. So you use subjective criteria to make your decisions. You're looking at values and you're looking at relationships. Well, what if I have a different set of values than you do? What if there's something, this relationship is more important to me than that relationship? All of a sudden you can have oodles of conflict over the same communication style. Maybe the one advantage that you have though in similar communication style is that once you kind of get on the same page, you can kind of you can connect how the other person is seeing things, and how their brain works maybe a little more readily than somebody who actually does see it totally differently. And so that is a pro of having somebody of a similar communication style. If you both have a preference for sensing, you'll most likely communicate sequentially also, so you can follow the other person's flow of thought a little bit easier than you can if they have a totally different approach. And then, okay, so to add to the whole mix, so we are not the sum total of our Myers-Briggs personality type. And that's one of the reasons why I like doing actually multiple assessments. And so StrengthsFinder is a great complement to Myers-Briggs because it nuances it so much. They call it Clifton Strengths now, so you got to change your name, but I haven't been able to change my name to that yet. So, and most people aren't familiar with it, so StrengthsFinder is a great complement. StrengthsFinder really is looking at a different thing than preferences. It's really looking at your natural raw talents that you can develop so that you can get to near perfect performance. So it is a much more performance-based kind of measurement. And then you've got Enneagram, which is also, it has some flaws, and I could probably talk to some of the dangers of the Enneagram in my opinion, but it does have some value for adding nuances in terms of what are your core motivations, which is measuring, again, something differently than Myers-Briggs or StrengthsFinder. So taking a, looking at it through different lenses can actually give you a more holistic picture of how we're really different. I had one of the gals in one of the workshops that I did, who was an ISTJ, which ISTJ are the factual communicators, and they're very direct communicators. And people were surprised that that she was an ISTJ because she was so soft and so kind. One of her top 5 strengths was harmony. So it nuanced her ISTJ in a very different way than what you might experience on ISTJ otherwise.
Leah mentioned she'd love to hear the pitfalls of the Enneagram. That's definitely the hot one.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest challenges with the Enneagram is that it has a little bit more of a negative lens on which it looks at what drives your personality. So the challenge that I've had to work a lot of my clients through is being able to extract from some of the negative burden that they end up carrying as they are going through the study of the Enneagram. One of the other challenges with the Enneagram is that it is an ancient narrative approach. It is not as prone to an effective, validated or reliable assessment. as some of the other things. StrengthsFinder is by far the best as far as scientific development of an assessment. And Myers-Briggs is pretty close behind it. The amount of studies that have been done on the same things, scales that are measured, getting consistent results is pretty high. None of the Enneagram assessments have been validated or reliable to that same degree. And so there are so many different free tests out there, and you can take all of them and you're going to get a different answer every single time. And it's a narrative approach. So those people who are teaching Enneagram in its truest form are really like, you've got to read and read and read and study and study and study, and then decide for yourself what you think your number is on the basis of your core motivations. It's really hard to measure motivations. It's a lot easier to measure preferences and behaviors, which is what StrengthsFinder and Myers-Briggs are measuring. It's a lot harder to measure motivations. And one of the hardest parts about measuring motivations is we often don't know what they are ourselves.
Yeah.
That's why a narrative approach to the Enneagram is the best approach, recognizing that you're going to get a lot of baggage with that in terms of, this is the immature or unhealthy side of your personality. And so some people having to extract that in the process of working with them has been a challenge for me as a coach. But I think they're also, on the upside of that is that identifying some of those core holes that we typically, pitfalls that we normally have, can be helpful at being able to understand maybe what are the lies that the enemy has fed us. I think that's probably one of the biggest values that you can get out of that negative side of the Enneagram is like the lies that the enemy feeds us. I have a girlfriend who's an Enneagram 2. She's in my small group, and we did kind of like this, like as a small group, we did like, what are the lies that we believe that we want to help each other overcome, and kick the enemy out of our lives and these lies that we're believing. And one of her lies was is that my needs don't matter. My needs don't matter. Later on, we were doing the Enneagram, and she found out that she's a 2 on the Enneagram. And a 2 on the Enneagram, one of their beliefs is that their needs don't matter. That they're always so over-focused on the needs of others, and they take on the feelings of others so much so that they don't feel like their needs matter. And one of their growth curves is to actually get in touch with what are your needs and how can you nurture yourself. And so as long as you take the Enneagram in that light and go, okay, these are not the negative things that it's saying about me are not what I am, but they might be lies that the enemy has thrown my way or a fallen world has thrown my way that I get to overcome with the power of Christ. So if you take the Enneagram in that light, I think that you can get some more traction out of it. You got to recognize going into it that you're going to get some of that.
Yeah, that's good. That would have been a good thing to start
Thank you.
with. I didn't even think about that of explaining the validity, and I haven't thought about that scientific backed, but that makes total sense. Another reason why we're having you on. So one thing that I would suggest as far as kind of wrapping this up today, ladies, and really taking this, harnessing this, and implementing into our lives is, number one, if you haven't, print out the worksheet that Andy shared with us today. You should all have that by now. It's in week 3 of our membership site. It's recently uploaded in our Facebook group just today. And number 1, plot yourself, right? So maybe write your name on whatever quadrant you identified with. And then the second step would be to plot out, like Annie suggested, that one other person, you can do more if you want, but that one other person that's critical to stepping into the process that you're currently on, plotting out where they are, so that you can have this as a physical reminder. I have in my closet, I have a actual dresser in my walk-in closet, and right above that dresser, I have just a vision board, another little sheet of scriptures, and it's things I just see every day, whether I want to or not. And I have to because I get dressed. And so maybe that's a place like that, or it's on your bathroom mirror. Might be a little intense unless you really want to just get this in your brain. But the point is putting it up, and I see Jennifer has, some sheets kind of in her office, put it up. So maybe it's your home office, but putting it up in a place that you see enough for a long enough period where some of this starts to get ingrained. Because I'm assuming by now, Annie, like this is so, you can just see it, it's like common knowledge, but for someone like myself, like this is fairly new information. I have to take a little bit of time to digest. But I feel like once it's inside of us, once we can start recognize it, it will get easier. And we'll be able to recognize how to communicate in those relationships and even understand what's going on in ourselves to, like we all mentioned beforehand, start to leverage. That's the whole point. It's like start to leverage and lean into our strengths and how we're put together. So I don't see any other questions. Annie, do you have any last things that you'd like to share today?
No.
Okay.
Oh.
Well, thank you for joining us.
I ask
Oh,
one
go
more
ahead.
question?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just curious. So, like, without having other people take the test, are there certain tricks to kind of noticing who other people are and like how to best communicate with them? I don't know if that makes sense.
Probably Brooke's idea is the best trick is just to like have this stuff up in front of you as much as you can and read it so that you can get it like kind of in your head. But the best way to do it is to just think about, like, ask yourself 2 questions about that other person. So in the whole Myers-Briggs is 4 pairs, trying to figure out everybody's 4 pairs so that you can have a conversation with them and connect with them at their space is probably not realistic, but these middle 2 can be really helpful. So just observe them and notice when they're talking. Do they talk more sequentially? Do they use the word steps? And do they talk about observable details? Then they might have a preference for sensing. If they're always big picture and they're talking about the future, then they're probably intuition. And so then if you can get that nailed down, now you know that they're one of 2 styles. Like if you know they're sensing, then they're either a compassionate connector or a problem solver. Well, that helps you already because you're only having to figure out 2 different ways of communicating with that person. You've narrowed it down from 4 to 2. So then if you start observing and how they're making their decisions, are they making them from a more logical, objective criteria? Are they very results oriented? Well, then they probably have a preference for thinking. If you notice that they are always talking about their values, honoring relationships, or asking questions to try and find common ground, then they might have a preference for feeling. Well, if you got that one down, then you know also that you've narrowed it down to 2 of the communication styles. If they have a preference for feeling, they're going to either be a compassionate connector or a bridge builder. Even if you can get it down to 2 of the 4 quadrants, that's going to give you then enough to be able to like do the activity where you kind of just plot them and then look at your own style and go, okay, how could I maybe what's one thing that I could do to create a more meaningful connection with that person? So I think it's really about just kind of like breaking it down and observing the pair one at a time.